Today, we dive into a compelling story titled, The Cheating Wife, A Journey of Betrayal and Redemption. This tale follows the emotional and transformative journey of Michael Larson and his family as they navigate the heart-wrenching discovery of Emily's infidelity. Through pain, regret, and the arduous path to forgiveness, we'll explore themes of love, trust, and the resilience of the human spirit. Join us as we unravel this gripping narrative and uncover the profound lessons it holds. Stay tuned, and let's get started. Michael Larson glanced at the clock on the dashboard of the rental car. It was just past 5:30 a.m., and the sun had barely started to rise over the horizon. He adjusted his grip on the steering wheel, feeling the familiar ache in his hands, a reminder of the years he had spent working with heavy machinery. Beside him, Jason Williams, his son-in-law, and trusted colleague, was finishing his cup of coffee, his eyes focused on the road ahead as they drove toward Orlando International Airport. The two men had been on the road for almost a week, overseeing the installation of a new power generator at a large manufacturing plant. The job had gone smoothly, thanks in large part to Jason's meticulous planning and attention to detail. Michael had come to rely on Jason more and more over the years, not just as an employee, but as a member of the family. Jason had married Michael's only daughter, Emily, 4 years ago, and the two had built a happy life together. They lived in a cozy house in Montclair, New Jersey, not far from where Michael and his wife, Sarah, had settled down after Michael's father retired from the family business. As they approached the airport, Jason broke the silence. "Dad, are you sure you don't want to catch an earlier flight back with me? We wrapped up everything here quicker than expected, and I can handle the rest of the training." Michael shook his head, a small smile playing on his lips. "Thanks, Jay, but I've got it covered. Besides, this knee of mine is still acting up from the surgery. I'll take my time wrapping things up here, and you can head back early. Sarah will be thrilled to have you home early for our anniversary. I promised her I'd take care of everything for the celebration." Jason chuckled, taking a last sip of his coffee. "You know Emily's been planning something big for you and Mom. She's been talking about it for weeks. I think she's trying to outdo herself this year." Michael's smile widened as he thought of his daughter. Emily had always been the light of his life, and seeing her so happy with Jason filled him with a sense of pride and contentment. "I'm sure whatever she has planned will be perfect. She's got a knack for making everything special." They pulled into the parking lot of the airport, and Jason began gathering his things. As he opened the door, he turned back to Michael. "I'll call you when I land, just to check in. And don't worry about anything here. I'll take care of the final reports and make sure the client is happy." Michael nodded, watching as Jason stepped out of the car and headed toward the terminal. He waited until Jason disappeared into the building before heaving a sigh and leaning back in his seat. The early morning light cast long shadows across the parking lot, and Michael found himself lost in thought. The trip to Orlando had been routine, just another job in a long line of projects that had kept the family business thriving. But something about this trip had felt different. Maybe it was the way Jason had been so insistent on Michael returning home early, or perhaps it was the nagging feeling in his gut that something wasn't quite right. Michael had learned to trust his instincts over the years, and right now, those instincts were telling him to be cautious. After a few moments, Michael shook off the feeling and started the car. He had one more day of work to finish before he could head back to New Jersey, and he wasn't about to let a little unease ruin what was supposed to be a celebration of his marriage. Michael spent the morning at the manufacturing plant, overseeing the last of the installation work and ensuring that everything was running smoothly. He moved slower than he used to, partly because of his knee and partly because of the weight of experience that came with age. The workers at the plant respected him, not just because he was the boss, but because he had earned their respect through years of hard work and dedication. As the hours passed, Michael found himself checking his phone more often than usual. Jason's flight was due to land in Newark around noon, and Emily had promised to pick him up from the airport. Michael wondered if they would have time to grab lunch together before heading home. He knew how much Emily loved surprising Jason with little gestures like that. By mid-afternoon, Michael had wrapped up the final details of the job. He made sure to thank the plant manager and the workers for their cooperation, exchanging a firm handshake with each of them before heading back to his car. The sun was high in the sky now, casting a harsh glare over the asphalt as Michael made his way back to the hotel. As he drove, Michael's mind wandered to the upcoming anniversary celebration. 35 years of marriage, what a journey it had been. He and Sarah had weathered their fair share of storms over the years, but their love had only grown stronger with time. He thought of the house they had built together, the family they had raised, and the life they had shared. It wasn't perfect, but it was theirs, and that was enough. When Michael arrived back at the hotel, he checked his phone again. There was a missed call from Jason, and a text message that simply read, "Landed safely. Emily's here. We'll see you soon." Michael smiled, imagining his daughter greeting Jason with her usual enthusiasm. She had a way of making everyone around her feel special, a gift that Michael had always admired. As the evening approached, Michael decided to take a walk around the hotel grounds. The Florida heat was oppressive, but he didn't mind. He found a quiet spot near the pool, where he could sit and watch the sun dip below the horizon. The colors of the sunset reflected off the water, creating a serene and peaceful atmosphere. Michael's thoughts turned to the future. He and Sarah had talked about taking a trip to Europe, something they had always dreamed of but never found the time to do. Now that the business was in good hands with Jason, Michael felt that it was finally time to start thinking about the next chapter of their lives. He knew Sarah would be thrilled at the idea, and he couldn't wait to see the look on her face when he suggested it. As the last rays of sunlight disappeared, Michael felt a sense of calm wash over him. The unease he had felt earlier in the day was gone, replaced by a feeling of contentment and anticipation. He knew that whatever the future held, he was ready to face it with the people he loved by his side. With that thought in mind, Michael returned to his room, ready to get some rest before his early flight back to New Jersey the next morning. The next morning, Michael woke early, feeling refreshed and eager to get home. He packed his bags, checked out of the hotel, and made his way to the airport with plenty of time to spare. The terminal was bustling with travelers, but Michael navigated the crowds with ease, his thoughts focused on the day ahead. As he made his way to the baggage claim area, Michael's phone buzzed in his pocket. It was a text from Sarah, wishing him a safe flight and reminding him to pick up some wine for the anniversary dinner. Michael smiled at the message, feeling a warm sense of connection to his wife even from miles away. But as he approached the escalator leading down to the baggage claim, something caught his eye. There, just ahead of him, was Emily. She was standing at the top of the escalator, her back turned to him, and for a moment, Michael wondered if she had come to surprise him. His heart lifted at the thought, but as he moved closer, he noticed something that made him stop in his tracks. Emily wasn't alone. She was with another man, someone Michael didn't recognize. And as he watched, the man wrapped his arms around her, pulling her into a tight embrace. Michael's heart sank as he saw his daughter lean into the embrace, her face buried in the man's chest. For a moment, Michael couldn't move. He felt as if the ground had been pulled out from under him, leaving him suspended in a void of disbelief and confusion. He wanted to look away, to pretend that he hadn't seen what was happening, but his eyes were locked on the scene before him. The man leaned down and kissed Emily on the lips, a tender, lingering kiss that spoke of intimacy and familiarity. Michael's mind raced, trying to make sense of what he was seeing. This couldn't be real. Emily was married to Jason, the man she loved, the man who had become a part of their family. How could this be happening? As the couple broke apart, Michael heard the man say something to Emily, but he couldn't make out the words. Emily laughed softly, her hand resting on the man's arm as they started to descend the escalator together. Michael felt a surge of anger and betrayal rise up within him. He had trusted Emily, raised her to be honest and faithful, and now he was witnessing something that shattered the very foundation of that trust. He knew he had to confront her, to demand an explanation, but his legs felt like lead, refusing to move. By the time Michael forced himself to follow them, they had already reached the bottom of the escalator. He watched as they walked toward the exit, their hands intertwined, oblivious to the world around them. Michael's heart pounded in his chest as he quickened his pace, determined to catch up with them. When he finally reached them, he called out her name, his voice trembling with emotion. Emily. Emily stopped in her tracks, turning slowly to face her father. The color drained from her face as she saw the look in his eyes, a mixture of shock, hurt, and anger that cut through her like a knife. "Dad," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "What are you doing here?" Michael ignored her question, his gaze shifting to the man standing beside her. "Who is this?" he demanded, his voice harsh and unyielding. The man took a step back, his expression wary as he glanced between Emily and Michael. Emily opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. She looked down at the ground, her hands trembling as she realized there was no way out of this situation. "How long has this been going on?" Michael asked, his voice growing louder with each word. "How long have you been cheating on Jason?" Emily flinched at the accusation, tears welling up in her eyes. "Dad, please, it's not what you think. Don't lie to me." Michael's voice cracked as he fought to keep his emotions in check. "I saw everything, Emily. How could you do this to Jason? To our family?" The man beside Emily finally spoke up, his tone calm but firm. "Sir, I think it's best if we all take a step back and stay out of this." Michael snapped, his anger directed at the man now. "You have no idea what you've done. You've destroyed everything." Emily reached out to touch her father's arm, but he pulled away, his eyes filled with pain and disappointment. "I can't believe this, Emily. I thought I raised you better than this." Tears streamed down Emily's face as she tried to find the words to explain herself, but nothing she could say would make this right. She had betrayed her husband, her father, and the life they had all built together. Michael took a deep breath, trying to steady himself. "I can't deal with this right now," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I need to get out of here." He turned and walked away, leaving Emily standing there, her heart breaking as she watched him disappear into the crowd. The man beside her placed a comforting hand on her shoulder, but it did little to ease the crushing weight of guilt and shame that now consumed her. As Michael made his way to the exit, his mind raced with 1,000 thoughts. He couldn't believe what he had just witnessed. The image of Emily with that man was burned into his memory, and no matter how hard he tried, he couldn't shake the feeling of betrayal that gnawed at his heart. He needed to get home, to talk to Sarah, to figure out what to do next. But as he stepped out into the warm Florida air, he realized that nothing would ever be the same again. Michael Larson drove in silence, his mind replaying the scene at the airport over and over again. The anger he felt had subsided, leaving behind a heavy, gnawing ache in his chest. He kept asking himself the same questions. How could Emily do this? What had gone wrong? And what was he going to tell Sarah? As he approached his home in Montclair, New Jersey, Michael noticed that the lights in the house were still on, even though it was late. Sarah was likely waiting up for him, excited to see him and hear about the trip. The thought of facing her, of telling her what he had discovered, made his stomach turn. He pulled into the driveway and turned off the engine, taking a moment to compose himself before going inside. The weight of what he had to do pressed down on him, making it hard to breathe. But he knew there was no avoiding it. He had to confront Emily, and he had to tell Sarah the truth. As Michael entered the house, he was greeted by the familiar scent of fresh coffee brewing in the kitchen. Sarah had always been a night owl, often staying up late to finish a book or catch up on her favorite shows. Tonight, though, she was waiting for him. "Michael, you're home." Sarah's voice was warm and welcoming as she came into the foyer, her face lighting up with a smile. She wrapped her arms around him, but he stiffened, unable to return the embrace with the same warmth. "Hi, Sarah," Michael said, his voice strained. He pulled away gently, his eyes avoiding hers. Sarah noticed the tension in his posture, the way he seemed distant, and her smile faded. "What's wrong? Did something happen on the trip?" Michael shook his head, not knowing where to begin. "We need to talk," he said, his voice heavy with the weight of what he was about to reveal. "It's about Emily." Sarah's heart skipped a beat, her mind immediately jumping to the worst-case scenarios. "Is she okay? Is something wrong with the baby?" Michael took a deep breath, steadying himself. "She's fine physically, but Sarah, I saw her at the airport tonight. She was with another man." The color drained from Sarah's face as she stared at her husband in disbelief. "What do you mean, another man? You mean a friend or?" Michael's jaw tightened as he forced the words out. No, not a friend. She was kissing him, Sarah. They were. It was clear they're involved. Sarah's hands flew to her mouth, her eyes wide with shock. No, that can't be true. Emily would never, she loves Jason. They have a son together. Are you sure it was her? I wish I wasn't, Michael said, his voice breaking. But I saw her, Sarah. I saw them together, and I heard them talking. She's been seeing him for a while now. This isn't some one-time thing. Tears welled up in Sarah's eyes as the reality of the situation sank in. She stumbled back, leaning against the wall for support. How could she do this? How could our daughter betray her family like this? I don't know, Michael said, his own voice filled with despair. I don't know what went wrong, but we need to figure out what to do now. We can't just ignore this. Sarah wiped her tears, trying to regain some semblance of composure. We need to talk to her. We need to understand why she did this and how to fix it. Michael nodded, though he wasn't sure there was any fixing this. The trust had been shattered, and he couldn't see a way to piece it back together. But he knew they had to try, for Jason's sake, for their grandson's sake, and for the family they had worked so hard to build. The next morning, Michael and Sarah sat in the living room, waiting for Emily to arrive. Michael had called her earlier, his voice firm as he told her they needed to talk. Emily had hesitated but eventually agreed to come over. Now, they waited in tense silence, the air between them thick with unspoken fears and anxieties. When the doorbell rang, Sarah flinched, her hands tightening around the coffee cup she was holding. Michael reached out to squeeze her shoulder, offering what little comfort he could. Emily walked in slowly, her eyes red and puffy from crying. She looked like a shadow of the confident, vibrant woman she had always been. As she stepped into the room, she avoided her parents' gazes, her head hung low. Emily, Michael began, his voice calm but firm, we need to talk about what happened yesterday. Emily swallowed hard, her hands trembling as she sat down on the edge of the couch. She couldn't bring herself to look at her parents, the shame and guilt weighing heavily on her. I'm sorry, she whispered, her voice barely audible. I'm so sorry. Sorry isn't enough, Emily, Sarah said, her voice cracking with emotion. How could you do this? How could you betray Jason like that? And what about Liam? What were you thinking? Emily's tears began to flow freely as she buried her face in her hands. I don't know, she sobbed. I wasn't thinking. I felt so alone, and Chris made me feel wanted. But I never meant for it to go this far. I never wanted to hurt Jason or any of you. Michael shook his head, his expression one of deep disappointment. You didn't just hurt Jason, Emily. You hurt all of us. You destroyed the trust we had in you. And now, what are we supposed to do? How do we move forward from this? I'll end it, Emily said quickly, desperation in her voice. I'll end things with Chris, and I'll do whatever it takes to make things right with Jason. I love him, Dad. I love him so much, and I don't want to lose him. Sarah sighed, her heart breaking for her daughter, but also for the family that was now in turmoil. Emily, love isn't just a word. It's a commitment. It's being there for each other, through the good and the bad. What you did, it broke that commitment. And it's going to take a lot more than just words to fix this. Emily nodded, wiping her tears. I know, Mom. I know I messed up, and I know it's going to take time, but I promise I'll do whatever it takes. Michael remained silent for a moment, his mind racing with thoughts of Jason and how he would react to this news. He knew that Jason deserved to know the truth, but the thought of tearing his family apart was almost too much to bear. We're going to tell Jason, Michael finally said, his voice heavy with resolve. He deserves to know the truth, and it's up to him to decide what happens next. Emily's face went pale, her eyes wide with fear. Dad, please don't tell him. It'll destroy him. It'll destroy our family. Emily, the truth is already out, Michael replied, his tone firm. You can't hide from it, and neither can Jason. He deserves to know, and he deserves the chance to make his own decisions. Emily sobbed uncontrollably, her heart breaking as she realized the full extent of the damage she had caused. She knew there was no escaping the consequences of her actions, and the fear of losing everything she held dear was overwhelming. Sarah moved to sit beside her daughter, wrapping her arms around her as Emily cried. "We're here for you, Emily," she whispered, her voice soft and comforting. "But you have to face this. You have to take responsibility for what you've done." Emily nodded through her tears, clinging to her mother as she tried to find the strength to face the inevitable. Later that day, Jason arrived at the Larson house, unaware of the storm that was about to hit. He walked in with a smile, greeting Michael and Sarah warmly, but his smile faded as he noticed the tension in the room. "Is everything okay?" Jason asked, his brow furrowing with concern. "Where's Emily?" Michael and Sarah exchanged a glance before Michael spoke up. "Jason, there's something we need to talk about. Emily will be here in a minute." Jason's concern deepened, and he sat down on the edge of the couch, his eyes flicking between his in-laws. "What's going on? Is something wrong with Emily or Liam?" At that moment, Emily walked into the room, her eyes still puffy from crying. She paused at the doorway, her hands clasped tightly together as she took in the sight of Jason, who turned to her with a worried expression. "Emily?" Jason's voice was gentle, but there was a hint of fear in it. "What's going on?" Emily felt her throat tighten, her heart pounding in her chest as she prepared to confess. She walked slowly over to Jason, sitting down beside him but unable to meet his gaze. "Jason," she began, her voice trembling, "there's something I need to tell you. Something I should have told you a long time ago." Jason's heart sank as he listened to the fear and guilt in her voice. He reached out to take her hand, his mind racing with possibilities. "Emily, whatever it is, we can work through it. Just tell me what's wrong." Emily took a deep breath, trying to steady herself. I've been seeing someone else. His name is Chris, and it's been going on for a few months now." The words hit Jason like a physical blow, his grip on her hand loosening as he struggled to process what she had just said. "What?" he whispered, his voice barely audible. "You've been cheating on me?" Emily nodded, fresh tears streaming down her face. "I'm so sorry, Jason. I never meant for it to happen, but I felt so alone, and I made a terrible mistake. I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I just want you to know that I love you, and I want to make things right." Jason felt a surge of anger and betrayal unlike anything he had ever experienced. He pulled his hand away from hers, standing up abruptly as he tried to distance himself from the pain. "You love me?" he spat, his voice filled with bitterness. "How could you do this to me, Emily? To us? I trusted you, and you threw it all away for some guy?" Emily sobbed harder, her body shaking as she tried to reach out to him. "Jason, please, I know I messed up, but I never stopped loving you. I was stupid, and I was weak, but I want to make it up to you. I want to fix this." Jason shook his head, backing away from her as if she were a stranger. "Fix this? How do you expect to fix this, Emily? You betrayed me. You betrayed our family. How do you expect me to forgive that?" Michael and Sarah watched in silence, their hearts breaking for both their daughter and son-in-law. They had hoped that this confrontation would lead to some sort of resolution, but it was clear that the wounds were too fresh, too deep. "I need to get out of here," Jason said suddenly, his voice strained as he turned toward the door. "I can't be here right now. I can't look at you." Emily's heart shattered as she watched him walk away, the sound of the door closing behind him echoing in her ears like a death knell. She collapsed onto the couch, her sobs racking her body as the reality of her actions came crashing down on her. Michael and Sarah moved to comfort her, but they knew there was little they could do to ease her pain. The damage had been done, and now all they could do was wait and hope that, somehow, their family could find a way to heal. Jason drove aimlessly, the events of the past hour replaying in his mind like a broken record. The revelation of Emily's betrayal had shattered the world he thought he knew. The life they had built together, the love he believed was unbreakable, now felt like a cruel illusion. He found himself pulling into a quiet, empty parking lot near a small park on the outskirts of Montclair. The place was deserted, offering him the solitude he desperately needed. Jason turned off the engine and sat in the car, staring blankly at the dashboard as the weight of what had happened pressed down on him. He had always prided himself on being a calm, rational person, someone who could handle anything life threw at him. But this was different. The betrayal cut so deep that it left him feeling raw and exposed, like an open wound that refused to heal. As he sat there, the anger that had fueled his departure from the Larson house began to dissipate, replaced by a crushing sense of sadness and loss. How could Emily have done this to him? How could she have risked everything they had for someone else? The questions swirled in his mind, but there were no answers, only the hollow echo of his own doubts and fears. He had always believed that their love was strong enough to withstand anything, but now that belief had been shattered. Jason's thoughts turned to Liam, their son. The idea of their family being torn apart was unbearable. How could he explain to his little boy that mommy and daddy might not be together anymore? How could he protect Liam from the pain and confusion that was sure to come? A tear slid down Jason's cheek, and he quickly wiped it away, ashamed of his own vulnerability. He had always been the strong one, the dependable one, but now he felt like he was falling apart. He reached for his phone, hesitating for a moment before dialing the number. The phone rang several times before the familiar voice on the other end answered. "Jason? What's going on? Are you okay?" It was Rachel, Emily's sister, who had always been like a sister to Jason as well. Jason's voice cracked as he spoke. "Rachel, I don't know what to do. Emily, she's been cheating on me." There was a long pause on the other end of the line before Rachel finally responded, her voice filled with shock. "What? Jason, are you serious? I can't believe this. I had no idea." Jason took a shaky breath, trying to hold back the tears that threatened to spill over. "I don't know what to do, Rachel. I can't even look at her right now." Rachel's voice softened, filled with empathy. "Jason, I'm so sorry. I don't know what to say. I know this must be tearing you apart, but please, don't make any hasty decisions right now. You're in shock, and you need time to process everything." Jason nodded, even though she couldn't see him. I needed to talk to someone. I feel like my whole world is falling apart." "You're not alone, Jason," Rachel said gently. "I'm here for you, and so are your friends and family. Whatever you decide to do, we'll support you. Just take it one step at a time, okay?" Jason closed his eyes, letting her words sink in. "Thanks, Rachel. I appreciate it." They talked for a while longer, with Rachel offering words of comfort and reassurance. By the time they hung up, Jason felt a little more grounded, though the pain still lingered like a heavy fog. He sat in the car for a while longer, gathering his thoughts before finally starting the engine. He knew he couldn't avoid the situation forever. Sooner or later, he would have to face Emily again, and he would have to make a decision about their future. But for now, all he could do was drive, letting the road stretch out before him as he tried to find a way to navigate the uncertain path that lay ahead. Back at the Larson house, Emily sat on the couch, clutching a pillow to her chest as if it could somehow shield her from the pain and shame that consumed her. The confrontation with Jason had gone exactly as she feared, leaving her feeling more lost and broken than ever. Sarah sat beside her, gently stroking her hair, while Michael stood nearby, his arms crossed as he stared out the window, lost in his own thoughts. "Mom," Emily whispered, her voice hoarse from crying, "what have I done? How did I let it get this far?" Sarah sighed, her heart aching for her daughter. "Emily, I wish I had an answer for you. But what's done is done. Now we have to figure out how to move forward from here." Emily buried her face in the pillow, her tears soaking into the fabric. "I've ruined everything. Jason will never forgive me. How could he? I betrayed him in the worst possible way." Michael turned to face her, his expression stern but not unkind. "Emily, you made a mistake, a terrible mistake. But you have to own up to it and take responsibility for what you've done. If you want any chance of salvaging your marriage, you need to be honest with Jason and with yourself." Emily looked up at her father, her eyes filled with despair. "But what if he can't forgive me? What if I've destroyed everything beyond repair?" Michael's gaze softened as he knelt down in front of her, taking her hands in his. "Emily, I don't know what the future holds. But I do know that running away from this won't solve anything. You need to face it head on, no matter how painful it is. That's the only way you'll ever find any peace. Emily nodded, her tears still flowing as she clung to her father's words. She knew he was right, but the fear of losing everything she held dear was almost too much to bear. I'll talk to him, she said finally, her voice trembling. I'll do whatever it takes to make things right, even if it means losing him. Sarah squeezed her daughter's shoulder, offering a small, sad smile. We're here for you, Emily. No matter what happens, we'll get through this together. Emily leaned into her mother's embrace, finding some comfort in the familiar warmth. But deep down, she knew that the road ahead would be long and difficult, and there were no guarantees that things would ever be the same again. As the days passed, the tension in the Larson household only grew. Jason had moved out temporarily, staying with a friend while he tried to sort through his feelings. Emily remained at her parents' house, grappling with the enormity of what she had done and the impact it had on everyone around her. The strain of the situation began to take its toll on Michael and Sarah's marriage as well. They had always prided themselves on their strong, loving relationship, but now they found themselves at odds over how to handle their daughter's crisis. One evening, as they sat at the kitchen table, the silence between them was palpable. The sound of the clock ticking on the wall seemed to echo in the room, a reminder of the passing time and the unresolved tension that lingered. Michael, Sarah finally said, breaking the silence, we need to talk about this. We can't keep avoiding it. Michael sighed, rubbing his temples as he leaned back in his chair. I know, Sarah, I don't know what to say anymore. This whole situation has thrown me for a loop. I never thought we'd be dealing with something like this. Sarah reached across the table, taking his hand in hers. Neither did I. But we can't let this tear us apart. We need to be there for Emily, and we need to be there for each other. Michael nodded, though his expression remained troubled. I just keep thinking about Jason. He's a good man, Sarah. He didn't deserve this. And I can't help but wonder if we could have done something to prevent it. Maybe if we'd paid more attention, or if we'd been more involved in their lives. Sarah shook her head, her grip on his hand tightening. Michael, you can't blame yourself for this. Emily is an adult, and she made her own choices. We raised her to know right from wrong, but ultimately, she's responsible for her own actions. I know, Michael said, his voice heavy with regret. But it doesn't make it any easier. I feel like we've failed her somehow, like we've failed both of them. Sarah's eyes filled with tears as she listened to her husband's words. She knew that he was struggling, just as she was, to come to terms with the situation. But she also knew that they couldn't afford to lose each other in the process. We haven't failed, Michael, she said softly. We're doing the best we can in an impossible situation. And we need to remember that we're in this together. We can't let this tear us apart. Michael looked into her eyes, seeing the love and determination there, and he felt a flicker of hope. He knew that their marriage was strong, but it would take work to get through this. I don't want to lose you, Sarah, he said, his voice filled with emotion. No matter what happens with Emily and Jason, I don't want to lose what we have. Sarah smiled through her tears, leaning forward to kiss him gently on the lips. You won't lose me, Michael. We'll get through this, one way or another. As they sat there, holding onto each other, they both knew that the road ahead would be difficult. But they were determined to face it together, no matter what challenges lay in their path. Jason spent the next few days holed up at his friend's apartment, trying to make sense of everything that had happened. He went through a roller coaster of emotions, anger, sadness, confusion, and even a sense of numbness that left him feeling detached from the world around him. His friend, Mark, gave him space, understanding that Jason needed time to process everything. But after a few days, Mark sat Jason down, a concerned expression on his face. Jason, I know this is a lot to deal with, but you can't stay here forever. You need to make a decision about what you're going to do next. Jason nodded, though he didn't have any clear answers. I know, Mark. I don't know if I can go back. Every time I think about Emily, all I can see is her with that guy, and it makes me sick to my stomach. Mark leaned forward, his voice gentle but firm. You don't have to decide anything right now, but you do need to talk to her. You need to hear her out and figure out if there's anything worth salvaging. And if not, then you need to start thinking about how to move on. Jason sighed, running a hand through his hair. I don't even know if I want to hear her out. Part of me just wants to walk away and never look back. I get that, Mark said, nodding in understanding. But if you walk away without giving it a chance, you'll always wonder what could have been. Maybe there's a way to work through this, or maybe there isn't. But you'll never know unless you talk to her. Jason knew that Mark was right, but the thought of facing Emily again filled him with dread. He wasn't sure if he could handle seeing her, knowing what she had done. But deep down, he knew that he couldn't avoid it forever. He needed closure, one way or another, and the only way to get it was to confront the situation head-on. You're right, Jason said finally, his voice heavy with resignation. I need to talk to her. I need to figure out if there's anything left to save. Mark nodded, giving him a supportive pat on the back. Whatever you decide, just know that I'm here for you, man. You've got friends and family who care about you, and we're all rooting for you. Jason managed a small smile, grateful for his friend's support. Thanks, Mark. I appreciate it. With that, Jason made up his mind. He would go back to Montclair and talk to Emily, even though it was the last thing he wanted to do. He needed to hear her side of the story, to understand why she had done what she did, and to figure out if there was any way to move forward. Jason arrived at the Larson house later that afternoon, his heart pounding in his chest as he walked up to the front door. He paused for a moment, taking a deep breath before ringing the doorbell. Emily answered the door, her face pale and her eyes filled with trepidation. She had been waiting for this moment, dreading it, but knowing it was inevitable. Jason, she said softly, her voice trembling. Thank you for coming. Jason nodded, his expression unreadable as he stepped inside. We need to talk, Emily. She led him to the living room, where they both sat down on the couch, the tension between them thick and palpable. For a moment, neither of them spoke, the silence stretching out uncomfortably. Finally, Jason broke the silence, his voice cold and distant. Why, Emily, why did you do it? Emily's eyes filled with tears as she struggled to find the right words. Jason, I don't even know where to start. I never meant to hurt you, and I never meant for it to go this far. I was lonely, and I felt like we were growing apart. And when Chris came along, he made me feel wanted. But I know that doesn't excuse what I did. Jason's jaw clenched as he listened to her, the pain in his chest intensifying with every word. So you cheated on me because you were lonely? Because I wasn't giving you enough attention? Emily shook her head, her tears spilling over. It's not that simple, Jason. I love you, and I never stopped loving you. But I made a terrible mistake, and I got caught up in something that I couldn't control. I was weak, and I let myself get carried away. But I swear to you, it didn't mean anything. Jason's eyes flashed with anger. It didn't mean anything? Emily, you betrayed me. You betrayed our family. How can you say it didn't mean anything? I know, Jason, I know, Emily sobbed, her hands shaking as she reached out to him. I know I messed up, and I know I've hurt you more than I can ever make up for. But I want to try. I want to make things right, if you'll let me. Jason stared at her, his heart torn between the love he still felt for her and the overwhelming sense of betrayal. He had always believed that their love was unbreakable, but now he wasn't sure if it could survive this. I don't know if I can do this, Emily, Jason said finally, his voice filled with sorrow. I don't know if I can ever trust you again. And without trust, what do we have? Emily's tears continued to flow as she listened to him, her heart breaking at the thought of losing him. I understand, Jason. I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I'm begging you to give me a chance. I'll do whatever it takes to earn back your trust, even if it takes the rest of my life. Jason looked into her eyes, searching for something. Some sign that there was still a chance for them, that their love could survive this trial. But all he saw was the pain and regret that mirrored his own. I need time, Jason said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. I need time to think, to figure out what I want to do. But I can't promise you anything, Emily. I can't promise that we'll get through this. Emily nodded, her heart heavy with the weight of his words. I understand, Jason. Take all the time you need. I'll be here. waiting for you, no matter what. As they sat there in the silence that followed, both of them knew that their future was uncertain. The love they had shared for so many years had been tested in the most painful way, and now it was up to them to decide if it could be rebuilt. But for now, all they could do was wait and hope that, somehow, they could find their way back to each other. The days turned into weeks as Jason and Emily remained in a state of limbo, uncertain of what their future held. Jason stayed with his friend Mark, while Emily continued to live at her parents' house with Liam. The physical distance between them mirrored the emotional chasm that had opened up, and both of them struggled to navigate the new reality of their lives. Jason spent much of his time working, throwing himself into his job in an effort to distract himself from the pain that gnawed at him. His colleagues noticed the change in him. He was quieter, more withdrawn, and the easygoing smile that had once been a hallmark of his personality was now a rare sight. Mark, ever the supportive friend, tried to get Jason to open up, but Jason was reluctant to share his feelings. The betrayal still felt too raw, too fresh, and he wasn't sure how to articulate the whirlwind of emotions that raged inside him. Mark said one evening as they sat on the couch, watching a baseball game that neither of them was paying much attention to, "You know I'm here for you, right? You don't have to go through this alone." Jason nodded, his eyes fixed on the TV screen, though he wasn't really watching. "I know, Mark, I appreciate it. It's just, I don't even know how to start processing all of this. Part of me wants to forgive her, to try and make it work for Liam's sake. But another part of me just wants to walk away and never look back." Mark sighed, understanding the difficult position his friend was in. "Whatever you decide, it has to be what's right for you. Don't let anyone pressure you into something you're not ready for. But also, don't let the pain cloud your judgment. You owe it to yourself, and to Liam, to make a decision that's going to lead to a healthier, happier future, whatever that looks like." Jason leaned back, running a hand through his hair. "I just wish there was a clear answer, you know? Something that would tell me what the right thing to do is." "There rarely is in situations like this," Mark said gently. "But I do know one thing. You're a good man, Jason. Whatever you decide, it'll be the right decision because you're taking the time to think it through." Jason appreciated the sentiment, but it didn't make his decision any easier. He knew that he needed to talk to Emily again, to see if there was any chance of rebuilding what they had lost. But the thought of opening himself up to that possibility, of risking further hurt, was almost too much to bear. Still, as the days passed, Jason found himself thinking more and more about Liam, about the family they had once been, and about the love that had brought him and Emily together in the first place. He knew that he couldn't stay in limbo forever. He needed to make a decision, one way or another. While Jason grappled with his emotions, Emily was facing her own internal battle. The guilt and regret she felt were overwhelming, and she spent many sleepless nights replaying her mistakes in her mind. She had betrayed the man she loved, the father of her child, and she didn't know if there was any way to make up for what she had done. But despite the hopelessness she often felt, there was a small part of Emily that refused to give up. She knew that she had to fight for her family, for her marriage, and for the life they had built together. She wasn't ready to throw it all away, not without a fight. Emily sought the support of her parents, who, despite their own heartbreak over the situation, were determined to help her in any way they could. Michael and Sarah were a constant presence, offering words of encouragement and advice as Emily tried to find a way to repair the damage she had caused. One afternoon, as she sat with her mother in the living room, Emily finally voiced the question that had been plaguing her for weeks. "Mom, do you think there's any hope for me and Jason? Or have I ruined everything beyond repair?" Sarah looked at her daughter, her heart aching for the pain Emily was going through. "I don't know, sweetheart. But I do know that Jason loves you. He always has. And love like that doesn't just disappear overnight." Emily nodded, though the uncertainty still lingered in her heart. "But what if he can't forgive me? What if he can't move past what I did?" Sarah reached out to take her daughter's hand, her voice gentle but firm. "Then you need to be prepared for that possibility. But Emily, you also need to be honest with yourself. Do you want to save your marriage because you truly love Jason and want to rebuild your life together? Or are you just afraid of being alone?" The question struck a chord with Emily, and she realized that she needed to confront her own feelings as much as she needed to confront Jason's. She had made a terrible mistake, but she couldn't let fear dictate her actions moving forward. She needed to be sure that whatever decision she made, it was for the right reasons. "I love him, Mom," Emily said, her voice thick with emotion. "I know I messed up, but I still love him. I just hope he can find it in his heart to forgive me." Sarah squeezed her hand, offering a small, reassuring smile. "Then you need to show him that, Emily. Show him that you're willing to do whatever it takes to make things right. But also be prepared to accept whatever decision he makes. It won't be easy, but you need to respect his feelings too." Emily knew her mother was right. She needed to be patient, to give Jason the space he needed to make his own decision, but she also needed to be proactive in showing him that she was committed to making things right. With renewed resolve, Emily decided that she would take the first step. She would reach out to Jason and ask him to meet her, to talk about everything that had happened and where they could go from here. It was a terrifying prospect, but she knew it was the only way forward. A few days later, Jason received a text from Emily asking if they could meet and talk. He stared at the message for a long time, his mind racing with conflicting thoughts. Part of him wanted to ignore it, to avoid the pain of rehashing everything that had happened. But another part of him knew that he needed this conversation, that they both needed to face the reality of their situation. After a long moment, Jason replied, agreeing to meet at a small coffee shop they used to frequent before Liam was born. It was a place filled with memories of happier times, and he hoped it might help them both find some clarity. When Jason arrived at the coffee shop, Emily was already there, sitting at a corner table with a cup of tea in front of her. She looked up as he entered, her eyes filled with a mixture of hope and anxiety. Jason took a deep breath and walked over to the table, his heart heavy with the weight of the conversation they were about to have. As he sat down, the tension between them was palpable, and for a moment, neither of them spoke. Finally, Emily broke the silence, her voice quiet and tentative. "Thank you for coming, Jason. I know this isn't easy, but I wanted to talk, to try and figure out where we go from here." Jason nodded, his expression guarded. "I think we both need that, Emily. There's a lot we need to discuss." Emily nodded, swallowing hard as she gathered her thoughts. "I know I've hurt you in ways I can't even begin to imagine, and I don't expect you to forgive me overnight. But I want you to know that I'm committed to making things right, whatever that looks like." Jason's eyes searched hers, trying to gauge her sincerity. "Why, Emily? Why did you do it? Was it really just because you were lonely?" Emily's eyes filled with tears as she looked down at her hands. "I wish I could give you a better answer, Jason. I wish I could tell you that there was some reason that made sense. But the truth is, I was lost. I felt like we were drifting apart, and instead of talking to you about it, I made a terrible mistake. I let my insecurities and fears get the best of me, and I betrayed the one person who means the most to me." Jason listened in silence, his heart aching at the pain in her voice. He could see the regret in her eyes, but the hurt he felt was still so raw, so deep. "I don't know if I can ever forget what you did, Emily," Jason said finally, his voice heavy with emotion. "The trust we had, it's gone. And I don't know if it can ever be rebuilt." Emily nodded, her tears spilling over. "I understand, Jason. And if you can't forgive me, if you can't move past this, I'll accept that. But I want you to know that I love you, and I always will. I made a mistake, but it doesn't change how much you mean to me." Jason's heart ached as he listened to her words, torn between the love he still felt for her and the overwhelming sense of betrayal. He wanted to believe that they could find a way to move forward, but he wasn't sure if he could ever truly forgive her. "I need more time, Emily," Jason said finally, his voice trembling. "I need time to think, to figure out what I want. But right now, I just don't know." Emily nodded, her heart breaking at the uncertainty in his voice. "I understand, Jason. Take all the time you need. I'll be here, waiting, no matter what." As they sat there in the coffee shop, surrounded by memories of happier times, both Jason and Emily knew that their future was uncertain. The love they had shared for so many years had been tested in the most painful way, and now it was up to them to decide if it could be rebuilt. But for now, all they could do was take it one day at a time, hoping that somehow, they could find their way back to each other. The following weeks were a delicate dance between hope and despair, as both Jason and Emily tried to navigate their new reality. Jason continued to stay with Mark, though he spent more time at the house, reconnecting with Liam and trying to maintain a sense of normalcy for their son. Emily, meanwhile, threw herself into therapy, determined to confront the underlying issues that had led her to make such a catastrophic mistake. She knew that if there was any chance of salvaging her marriage, she needed to do the hard work of healing herself first. One evening, as Jason was putting Liam to bed, the little boy looked up at him with wide, innocent eyes. "Daddy, when are you coming home?" The question hit Jason like a punch to the gut, and he struggled to find the right words. "I don't know, buddy," he said softly, brushing a lock of hair away from Liam's forehead. "But I promise, no matter what happens, I'll always be here for you." Liam nodded, his small hand reaching out to hold Jason's. "I miss you, Daddy." "I miss you too, Liam," Jason said, his voice thick with emotion. "I miss you too." As Jason sat there, holding his son's hand, he felt a glimmer of something he hadn't felt in a long time, hope. Maybe, just maybe, there was a way forward. Maybe they could find a way to heal, to rebuild, to create a new version of the life they had once shared. The next morning, Jason called Emily and asked if she would be willing to attend couples therapy with him. He knew it was a small step, but it was a step in the right direction, and he wanted to see if there was any chance of rebuilding their relationship. Emily agreed immediately, her heart lifting at the prospect of working through their issues together. She knew it wouldn't be easy, but she was willing to do whatever it took to make things right. Over the next few weeks, Jason and Emily began attending therapy sessions together, slowly opening up about their feelings, their fears, and the pain they had both experienced. It was a difficult process, filled with moments of raw honesty and vulnerability, but it also brought them closer in a way they hadn't been in a long time. Through the therapy, Jason began to see that Emily's betrayal, while devastating, wasn't the entirety of their relationship. He started to remember the love they had shared, the bond that had brought them together in the first place. It didn't erase the hurt, but it gave him a new perspective, one that allowed him to see the possibility of healing. For Emily, the therapy sessions were a lifeline, helping her to confront her own issues and understand the deeper reasons behind her actions. She knew that she had a long way to go, but for the first time in a long time, she felt a sense of hope for the future. As the weeks turned into months, Jason and Emily slowly began to rebuild their relationship. It wasn't easy, and there were still moments of doubt and fear, but they were committed to making it work. One evening, after a particularly emotional therapy session, Jason and Emily sat together on the couch, holding hands as they talked about their future. "Do you think we can really do this, Jason?" Emily asked, her voice filled with uncertainty. "Do you think we can rebuild what we had?" Jason looked into her eyes, seeing the vulnerability there, and he knew that they had come too far to give up now. "I don't know if we'll ever have what we had before," he said honestly. "But maybe we can build something new, something stronger. It's going to take time, and it's going to take a lot of work. But I'm willing to try if you are." Emily's eyes filled with tears, but this time they were tears of hope. "I'm willing, Jason. I'm willing to do whatever it takes." They sat there in silence for a while, holding onto each other, knowing that the road ahead would be difficult but also filled with possibility. They had been through the fire, and while they were still healing, they were doing it together. A year had passed since the day Jason had discovered Emily's betrayal, and while the scars of that time remained, they had slowly begun to heal. Jason had moved back home, and he and Emily had continued their therapy, both individually and as a couple. It had been a long, difficult journey, but they had come out the other side stronger and more connected than ever. Their relationship was not the same as it had been before. There was a new level of honesty and openness between them that had not existed in the past. They had learned to communicate better, to listen to each other, and to work through their problems together, rather than letting them fester and grow. Liam, now a little older and wiser, had sensed the change in his parents and had adjusted well to the new dynamic. He was happier and more secure, knowing that his family was healing and that his parents were committed to making their relationship work. On a sunny afternoon, Jason and Emily took Liam to the park where they had shared so many happy memories as a family. They watched as he ran around, laughing and playing, his joy infectious as he explored the world around him. As they sat on a bench, watching their son, Jason took Emily's hand, squeezing it gently. "We've come a long way, haven't we?" Emily smiled, her heart swelling with gratitude and love. "We have. And I couldn't have done it without you, Jason." Jason leaned over to kiss her on the forehead, his eyes filled with affection. "We're in this together, Emily. No matter what happens, we'll face it together." As they sat there, basking in the warmth of the afternoon sun, they knew that their journey was far from over. There would be more challenges, more obstacles to overcome, but they were ready to face them head-on. They had been through the darkest of times, but they had found their way back to each other. And in doing so, they had built a new foundation for their relationship, one based on love, trust, and a shared commitment to the future. As the sun began to set, casting a golden glow over the park, Jason and Emily stood up, calling Liam over to them. He ran into their arms, his laughter filling the air as they embraced him, their little family whole once more. And as they walked back home, hand in hand, they knew that they were stronger together, and that no matter what challenges lay ahead, they would face them as a team. Their love had been tested, but it had endured. And now, with a new beginning in front of them, they were ready to face whatever the future held, together. As we reach the conclusion of The Cheating Wife, a journey of betrayal and redemption, we witness the power of forgiveness, healing, and the strength found in family bonds. Michael Larson and his family demonstrate that even in the face of profound betrayal, love and commitment can guide them towards a hopeful future. Through therapy, honest communication, and unwavering support, Jason and Emily managed to rebuild their relationship, setting a powerful example of resilience and transformation. Thank you for joining us on this emotional journey. If this story resonated with you, please share your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe for more inspirational content. Until next time, remember that even in our darkest moments, there's always a path to redemption. Stay blessed and keep believing in the power of love and forgiveness.